Next item, this is discussion and possible action on prevention by the Texas Animal Health Commission on condition and proposed response to Nilgai population in and around Port Mansfield. So they're going to give us a PowerPoint presentation.
My name is Dr. Sandra Leindecker. I'm a veterinarian, 31 years almost, and I have been with the Texas Animal Health Commission. It'll be 1 year, now March 1st. I was a large and a small animal and exotic animal veterinarian. Still am. I own property and a resident in Port Mansfield, out there in Port South. It's more for vacation, but here lately I've been coming down about once or twice a month, which is great. Love fishing, love the animals. I just want to clarify, because I know I've heard people think that we're going to go out there and dig a huge pit, kill all your nilgai and all your deer and put them in that pit. You have my word that that will not happen. We're here to help control fever ticks, but that is a crime and a waste of meat when there's so many poor people out there that need food. So I don't want anybody to panic and think, oh my God, we're here for that. Please don't. We're here to talk about cattle fever ticks and why it is important, and then also think about the stocking rates. How much grass do you have in Port Mansfield? You know, if you take that glass, how many goldfish can you put in that glass? You know, maybe one or two. You can't put 100 goldfish in that glass. So part of it is also animal control. I mean, if you have a ranch, many of you probably have, you can only put so many cattle. You can't keep having more and more and more. So that's part of the things that we want to talk about. The most important thing that we want to talk about is the importance of the cattle fever tick. It does affect you, meat, our food, and we're here to protect your food and mine too. Okay. Eli Benavides has been with the region, I think what?
Going on 10 years.
Going on 10 years. He's here in the Willacy County. He's a region manager for Texas Animal Health Commission in our region. And I'm going to turn it over to him. And then if you have any questions, he or I will gladly answer questions after the meeting, okay?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Ron, can you work the slideshow? So we're going to give a fever tick update for Port Mansfield mainly, but we'll give some update on the surrounding areas and what the fever tick does and why it matters. And like Dr. Landecker said, how it'll affect the consumer, right? We're here to protect marketability of livestock. We have major disease outbreaks. The price of eggs right now with avian influenza through the roof, right? So cattle fever ticks, they spread further north into the bigger ranch country. Affects a lot of people. Interstate movement stops. You can't market your livestock. You can't sell your cattle. You can't sell beef. So not only is everyone likes steak, right? Price of meat's gonna go up, but all your other products, leather goods, dog food, cattle are used for more than just beef. Cosmetics, all that stuff. Now that's big picture, right? But so we'll get into just kind of some general information on fever ticks. So there's two types of fever ticks: Boaphyllus annilatus and microplus. So here in South Texas, we have the tropical cattle fever tick, which is a microplus tick. From Laredo north, it's a little bit drier climate. They have a tick that's pretty much the same thing, but it's called the annilatus. Very similar. They look almost identical. It takes someone that really knows what they look like to be able to tell them apart. But for what we need to know today, what we have are microplus. So cattle fever ticks are a one-host tick. So they'll live their entire life cycle on one animal. Your typical dog tick, deer tick, it's a three-host tick. It can start on a rabbit and get on you, and then get on a cow. You know, a fever tick will get on one animal. It'll get on one deer. It'll complete its life cycle on that one deer. Get on a nilgai, cow, whatever. The only reason we can eradicate cattle fever ticks is because they are a one-host tick. There is a point in that life cycle where we can kill them and keep treating the animal, because we know we'll get that tick there every time. Say an amblyoma, whatever kind of, it has a bunch of different hosts. So there's no way we could eradicate your deer tick or your dog tick, stuff like that. But this we can, because we know it's host, very specific host, large mammals, hoof stock more than anything, exotics, deer, Nilgai, stuff like that. Why are they important? So they can carry a protozoa called Babesia bovis, which causes cattle fever, cattle fever. So Babesia, when you think about this program, Babesia is what they can spread, okay? And so you probably wondering, well, why not find a treatment for Babesia, right? Why not solve that problem? Tried that. It's very expensive. It doesn't really work. Try find a treatment for Babesia. So the way you keep Babesia out of our United States cattle is you keep the ticks out. The United States imports about 1 million head of cattle, Mexican cattle, every year. About half of those cattle come from Mexico with Babesia already, right? You can have the Babesia in the Mexican cattle. If you keep the tick out, you'll never have the disease with the vector, right? So the cattle in Mexico, they're born in Mexico, they get exposed to Babesia at a very young age. So the ones that survive develop immunity. So the Mexican cattle are immune to the disease. When the disease comes to the United States, our cattle haven't been exposed to that disease. So if the disease gets here with that tick on U.S. cattle, we can see up to 90% death loss on U.S. cattle. So imagine 90% of our cattle population dead. What's that going to do to the price of beef? It's going to be crazy, okay? So that's why we got to keep the tick out. There is no cure for Babesia and no vaccine. Like I said, in naive cattle, which we have in the United States, we can see up to 90% death loss. An outbreak of cattle fever would destroy the Texas market, the U.S. market. We wouldn't be able to export beef anywhere because nobody would take it, right? If you think of the old cattle drives of the 1800s, the reason they stopped because when Texas cattle went north, cattle died. So Oklahoma, Arkansas, all those states said, we're not taking Texas cattle. So that's why this program was developed, because we don't ever want to get to that point. Beef and oil are number 1 and number 2 markets in Texas, right? We lose those, you affect a lot of people. Hosts for cattle fever ticks. So as of recently, cattle are the preferred host, right? And it wasn't until about 20 years ago that we found that white-tailed deer were a good host. They're not a great host, but they are a good host. Nilgai antelope are native to India. Cattle fever ticks are native to India. So unintentionally, a native host to cattle fever ticks was introduced into Texas in the, whatever it was, 60s, 70s. And every other exotic that's been introduced in Texas is also a potential host. We found fever ticks in Willacy County on cattle, horses, white-tailed deer, nilgai, red deer, Texas doll sheep, gemsbok, eland, kudu, and every other thing you can think of, we found cattle fever ticks on. So why is that important? Nilgai, y'all that hunt nilgai or know they don't come up to a feeder, right? Very well. White-tailed deer do, so we can feed ivermectin corn. Like in Port Mansfield, we have 20 feeders that we feed ivermectin corn for the deer, and we can treat the fever ticks on deer for half the year. With the nilgai, we have no options. There is no treatment option for nilgai. Even if there was, any treatment that we come up with can't have withdrawal time. So, for the white-tailed deer, we pull the corn 6 days before hunting. That ivermectin's out of their system. You could hunt them during deer season. Nilgai can hunt year-round, right? So if we find a treatment for nilgai that will affect their withdrawal time, so we treat it with this product, you can't eat the meat for so many days. So there's no real good solution. A lot of the locals make a lot of money on nilgai hunts, right? So one of those deals where we want to be able to treat them because it'll help with the fever tick situation, but if we do that, it limits when you can hunt them. A lot of ranchers rely on hunting nilgai to help with their cattle, production costs and all that. So, yeah, these are all the hosts for cattle fever ticks. that we have in the area. Go ahead, Ron. So how do we treat white-tailed deer? Like we talked about, feed ivermectin corn for about half the year. From March 1st to July 31st, we can feed corn. Then we got to pull the corn July 31st to meet that 60-day withdrawal period so we can start hunting later in the year. In Port Mansfield, we had fed corn year-round before when there was no hunting taking place. We've been told that we can't do that anymore, not by anybody here, but we have to do environmental assessments for everything we do. And the environmental assessment was very specific that we could only feed corn from March 1st to July 31st, right? So we're in the process of getting approvals in place that if there ever was a time when Port Mansfield wouldn't harvest deer through the youth program, then we could feed corn all year and attack the ticks all year. Problem with ivermectin is it doesn't have any long-term effect, so the minute they stop eating that corn, the ivermectin residues in their blood that kill the ticks will drop below levels that will kill the ticks. So they have to be on it all the time for it to be working. So when you pull the corn for 6 months, you're not being treated for 6 months. So in that time period, we're cycling ticks, right? So
I do want to say something else. That corn also benefits those deer because it does deworm them from internal parasites. So when there's treated corn, which is about to start again, when people in Port Mansfield are feeding corn in their driveway or they're feeding these deer and they fill up on that corn, they're not getting the benefit of the ivermectin treated corn that we're feeding in Port Mansfield. So that is the reason when you see those signs that say don't feed the deer, it's not about don't feed the deer, you know. Hey, when I'm there, I cut up pieces of watermelon and I throw them out and I enjoy the deer coming and watching. You know, but just try not, you know, you can do it at minimum, keep the deer tame, but please remember that the purpose of that is to help kill the ticks on these deer, and it deworms them too. And I don't know if you've noticed, the deer start looking healthier. I've been around Port Mansfield 10 years, and I can always tell, and hopefully you all can too, that sometimes these deer look pretty poor, and sometimes they look really good. So just FYI.
Yeah. So the deer, we could feed ivermectin corn. Nilgai, there is no treatment for Nilgai. They won't come to the corn feeders. They don't eat the ivermectin corn. And we've tried different feeds, alfalfa, different pellets, all these flavors that people have said works. We've even purchased Nilgai that were tame Nilgai that we saw them go to a feeder. As soon as we turned them out into the ranch country, they forgot what a feeder was. They forgot what a trough was. They went wild, which was expected, right? But we wanted to see if they would show the others, but no, they went wild right away. So that didn't work out. So since Nilgai can be hunted year-round, treatment options are very limited. Any treatment has to have no withdrawal time. High fences, you all have seen high fences being built, right? The reason for the high fences is in order for these Nilgai not to spread ticks over long distances. A Nilgai's home range is like 20 miles. We caught the Nilgai on Boca Chica Beach, and he made it to Sebastian in a matter of weeks. Traveled up the coast, hit the floodway, took the floodway all the way to Sebastian. That's a huge home range. So movement barriers, we may not be able to treat them, but at least maybe we can prevent them from spreading ticks all over the place. And then with white-tailed deer, population management. So think about cattle fever ticks are a one host tick, okay? So we use cattle to go out into the pastures. They pick up those ticks. We treat them systematically. So the Nilgai at the same time are dropping off ticks, but eventually you have enough cattle in the environment that the cattle will pick up all the ticks and clean up the pasture. Problem is, if you have 50 head of cattle, but you have 300 white-tailed deer, you have another 70 Nilgai, it doesn't matter what the cattle do because there's too many untreated hosts on the environment versus what's treated. So, like Dr. Landecker said, we're not talking about eradicating Nilgai or white-tailed deer, but there is a number that needs to be managed to where we're treating deer, right? So many deer on Port Mansfield. But if you have an equivalent amount of Nilgai that are not treated, what we're doing on the deer has no effect on the environment, on cleaning up the ticks. So that's why we talk about population management. So just a situation report for Port Mansfield. We first found fever ticks on May 14th of 2018. That was a roadkill white-tailed deer that was found infested. That year, 172 were harvested. 12 of those deer were infested. As soon as we found fever ticks at Port Mansfield, at the time, that was the most northern infestation in Willacy County. So we knew we had a problem. We didn't have feeders out there because we hadn't realized that the ticks had gotten that far north. So right away, we put out 20 deer feeders, and we started that year-round corn feeding that I talked about earlier. During that time frame, we worked with the board at the time on how do we manage the deer population. And what came out of it was the Texas Youth Hunters Program, right? So since then, the Youth Hunters Program has done a hunt pretty much every year. I think they skipped 1 year in there. And the goal has been to harvest about 100 deer a year with the kids doing that. We haven't reached that number every year. It's been less for the most part, but that's been the goal. Knowing that there's probably a population on Port Mansfield right now of probably 400 deer, I would imagine. That's what we're estimating. And a lot of those deer are reproducing every year. Some have singles, some have twins. So the 100 deer that we are proposing are harvested every year, that's just keeping the population stable, right? Because you're having babies that are being born every year. So what we're doing is making really no impact to the deer population at the rate of 100 per year. Go ahead, sir. So Youth Hunter Program from 2019 to 2020, this was after we fed all year. They harvested 101 deer that year. 0 were infested, so that was great. In 2020, 2021, another 113 were harvested. 0 cattle fever ticks were found. 2021, 2022, 61 were harvested. No cattle fever ticks were found. And we skipped a year. In 2023, only 36 were harvested. At that time, we found 2 deer with fever ticks. So there was a shift, right? They had been cleaned. Now we see fever ticks. This past year, 81 were harvested, 12 were infested, and we had 170 cattle fever ticks were found on those 12 deer. One of those deer had about 140 ticks on him and was anemic. He was gonna die from the tick burden. We don't do nothing. That tick burden keeps multiplying in the environment. You'll see more and more deer like that. We haven't had any Nilgai harvested on Port Mansfield, so we don't know what the Nilgai look like as far as if they're infested or not, but they are a better host than white-tailed deer. So I would assume that they are also infested, but we don't know that for sure. So proposals for mitigating cattle fever ticks on white-tailed deer: increase annual whitetail harvest by increasing youth hunts. Right now, they try to do 10 hunts for 10 kids. That takes 100 deer. We know that's not enough, so maybe one thing we could do is increase that to where more kids get that opportunity to hunt more deer. That meat goes to the kids, is not wasted. At the same time, it'll help with the population management. You have a better deer herd, and it'll help with fever tick eradication. Perform annual white-tailed deer census surveys to improve population management and increase the number of treated animals in Port Mansfield. So right now we have 20 feeders out, and theoretically that's to treat 200 deer. On a normal circumstance, you put 1 feeder per 200 acres. In the county, we have about a 1 per 20 stocking rate, so 1 deer per 20 acres. So we know our feeding rate is low, but in order to get an accurate feeding rate, we need to know how many deer are really on Port Mansfield. I drove around one evening and counted 300, and I was just driving around from what I saw. So there's at least 300, maybe way more than that, but we don't know, right? So a survey would answer those questions. Like I talked about earlier, it's a numbers game. To drive cattle fever ticks to eradication, you need to have more treated hosts than non-treated hosts in the environment. And then if we don't have any hunts, we're trying to get approval to where we can feed all year to at least be able to treat for the most part of the year. issue with that, and it won't be an issue once the high fences are done, but deer still have a radius, so some deer do travel outside of Port Mansfield into the ranch lands around there. So any deer that's harvested, when we fed year round, any deer that was harvested around Port Mansfield on private land, we had to do residue testing to make sure that that meat was consumable. But when the high fences are complete, then that won't be an issue because the deer will be contained in Port Mansfield. Okay, Ron, go ahead. So Nilgai. So we've counted about 100 Nilgai on Port Mansfield. One day we saw about 70 of them on Port South, around like where the sewage tank is, around the pit there. Then by the airport, we saw another big group of Nilgai. So we know there's a lot of Nilgai out there. Since there's no treatment for Nilgai, keeping fewer Nilgai in the environment will be fundamental to eradicating cattle fever ticks. Like I talked about earlier, it's a numbers game. We can't treat them, so they're cycling ticks. And when you have a large Nilgai population versus animals that are treated, white-tailed deer, we're not doing anything. We're not actually eradicating ticks because we have Nilgai that are cycling them. So harvesting Nilgai will provide much needed surveillance of the TFT infestation rate in Nilgai on that population in Port Mansfield. So high fences, like we talked about earlier, that's all we can do right now with no treatment option. That's why those high fences are going up. At least we'll keep them contained, and then we can figure out a plan while they're there, right? So north of Port Mansfield, big ranch country. Right now we have it contained in Willacy County. You know, we do have surveillance on those big ranches north of Port Mansfield. We scratch a lot of cattle there every year. We scratch hundreds and hundreds of Nilgai, and thankfully it hasn't crossed into that big ranch country. But I mean, you think about once you get past that East Foundation, further north you have even bigger ranches. It gets into that big ranch country. I mean, it's
Game over.
probably gone. There's no stopping it then because there's just so much country that those Nilgai travel. From here to Rivera, it's wide open. There's no high fences there. It's gone. So we need to stop it here where we're at. Go ahead. So I wish we had a plan, like detailed plan on what we're proposing, but what we would like to do, right, is work with Wildlife Services, obviously Port Mansfield, locals, food bank, on how we can harvest some of these Nilgai and how either the residents get the meat or the food bank gets the meat, so that meat gets put to use, right? We don't, as Dr. Landecker said, want to dig a big pit and bury all these animals. We want that meat to go out to the community. However,
And if you do dig a big pit, put coals in there and let's make them into
oh yeah, we'll collect all the heads, yeah. So, like I said, we just want feedback on if this is something that y'all are willing to do, and then if so, we can create a plan that involves the residents, food bank, or however we want to do it. But before we get them stirred up on trying to figure out how to do things, or how much meat are they going to get, stuff like that, we want to make sure that's something y'all would like to be willing to do before we move forward with more planning.
So I have a question. First of all, thank you for all the information. Thank you for partnering with us and helping us with this thing. We definitely don't want it to go beyond here, but we do want to control it. So part of the plan would be to harvest some of these animals and of course make good use of the meat. Have you had discussions, a conversation with Texas Youth Hunt about possible Nilgai hunt, since it is a year-round opportunity?
What's difficult about the Nilgai part of it is not like the deer that are super gentle. They'll come to a feeder.
I know.
Those Nilgai, you shoot one of them,
They're gone.
they're gone.
If you're lucky.
Yeah, and a Nilgai is you would need kids that are very experienced hunters. Because if you shoot them wrong, or you don't shoot them wrong, you're gonna have a Nilgai running around that's wounded, and so it's just more complicated.
So does it have to be youth?
It doesn't have to be youth, but the hard part is getting enough of them, right? So if you put, and Port Mansfield is a pretty small area to have a bunch of guys try to shoot Nilgai running around everywhere. So it's just it's hard. Yeah, it's just hard because the animal itself, it's hard. It's a hard hunt. So Yeah, we've talked about Wounded Warrior, stuff like that, but it's just.
One of the discussions that we've had previously was to let them bring in people, as was done before, to take out a large number, but instead of digging a pit and burying the animals, we would offer up a lottery for the locals, a certain number, we come up with a number, we put in their assistance, and okay, we're gonna hopefully take 50 Nilgai today, or whatever we have come up with. And in that 50, the food bank will take all of them, we have let them, which would be fine, but obviously, might as well let the locals have a chance at it as well. And so we'd say, okay, you know what, we're gonna have a lottery for 20 deer, or pick 20 Nilgai.
Right.
And then those 20 people would go out and pick their deer out of the field, and then the rest would go to the food bank. But at least that way, they're not, one, being buried, which was done in the past, and two, it would give locals an opportunity, because one of the biggest concerns and frustrations that people have articulated over the youth hunting program is all these kids come in and shoot the deer, but the locals aren't allowed to do so. Well, okay, I don't respect that. The deer are tearing up their gardens, you might have to be one of the first people to get to shoot them, you know? But it goes outside the insurance limitations and all this stuff with the youth hunt. So our initial discussion was them developing a way to take a large number at one time, because doing hunts, like you said, you shoot one, they all go hide, you may get 2 or 3 all day long instead of 50. If they bring people that can do it, take out 50 in a day, great, but what do we do with all that meat? So then we say, okay, well, the locals get 20 people, local will draw a lottery. They come in, they'll draw a number, get to do it. Then everything else goes to the food bank. That way we're not there's no waste, we're taking care of it. And whoever these guys hire to clean the deer, the only cost to the local would be, hey, you know what, you're gonna pay this guy to clean the animal for you. Because we don't need those 20 people taking those Nilgai to their houses and having yards full of guts all over Port Mansfield. So we have somebody else do it. And they get the car, they get the body, everything, they get the whole 9 yards, then all the dirty work is done out in the field. And
So can you come up with a plan?
No idea.
Yes. Yeah, so we've talked, so Wildlife Services is a branch of USDA, and they do wildlife management, like the hogs, all the hogs that are running around ruining farmland. They'll come in, help ranchers with their hog problems, stuff like that. So they are very experienced in taking whatever, 10, 20, whatever it comes up to be, they can come in and do that. For a Nilgai, in order to, if you're gonna take a small number of Nilgai, the best way to do it to where you get the most efficient way to do it is at night with night vision, and then they'll shoot them at night, which I know that was a concern that I heard people were worried about them coming in at night. But that's the most efficient way to do it, is at night with thermals and all that. That's one option. If it's determined that there's 200 Nilgai and 50 will need to be taken, then they could do several night hunts, or they come in with a helicopter and get the 50. So there's different options. It just depends on what y'all are comfortable with,
So,
what y'all want to do.
Yeah, well, you guys are the experts in this
Right.
thing. I think on our side is, at least on my side, is I like the idea of sharing the meat. I mean, it's one of the tastiest meats ever, but sharing the meat with obviously the locals, and locals are taxpayers.
Yep.
Exactly.
And that includes outside Port Mansfield as well,
Yeah.
because I'm from La Sara.
Yeah.
I'm a taxpayer too, so how do we come up with a plan that shares that meat with everyone that?
Yeah,
that's-
and that's where it gets complicated, right?
I know.
That's where it gets complicated.
But we'll put the heads together, and I'm
Yeah.
sure we have the intelligence to solve that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
So like Parks and Wildlife, when they do their like refuge hunts or whatever, they have a lottery.
Yeah.
So maybe you do it to where people put their name in the hat, and then it just.
Well, and I think, I like the idea of saying, we need to take down 50 of them, let's do it.
And it may not be
Instead of-
50, it may be-
well, I'm
maybe
just
less,
using
yeah,
that.
it may be.
But I'd rather that we do something like that than possibly a lottery, because as you said, I mean, those things are skittish as heck.
Mhm.
And if you may not get, if your number is
Yeah.
50, you may get 3,
It may be.
because they scattered.
That's right.
Yeah,
But,
maybe.
so that's not gonna solve our problem.
No.
So, can you put together a proposal that says, after looking at that, we can, let's survey, this is how many we have, this is what's gonna take to kind of,
Yeah.
control them, and this is the plan for bringing them down.
Yeah.
And this is what we're gonna do with the meat, this is what, and then, and then present it to us.
Okay.
We're real interested. We definitely don't want this thing to go beyond where it needs to.
Yep.
I know I've had some conversations with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they say, you guys are in trouble, basically. Because if you don't do something, this is gonna get worse.
Yeah, we're sure.
Yeah.
Of course.
So at least that's my position is put a plan together, look at it. Now, you mentioned that you wanted to treat the corn year round. Who gives you permission to do that?
So we have to do an environmental assessment,
Okay.
right? Whenever we do anything. And on that environmental assessment, because of hunting,
Yeah.
we can only feed from March 1st to July 31st
Right.
because the hunting season starts, bow season, beginning of October, whatever it is. So we have to stop feeding corn. That first year that we fed year round in Port Mansfield, there was no hunting, right? So we were able to feed all year. We weren't supposed to do that, but the situation was bad. We knew we had
Sure.
ticks, we needed to address it.
Yeah.
So now, in order to feed year round again, we're going through the approval process to be able to feed year round
Approval from whom?
from USDA,
Okay.
Parks and Wildlife, which it's almost there. It looks like we're gonna get the approval, and we'll only do that if there's no hunting being done, right? Because if we feed year round, you go hunt the deer,
Yeah,
you can't
yeah,
eat the meat.
okay.
It's not, you can't consume it. So it's either.
So how are you gonna balance both to control population?
You can't, but we need to do something.
Okay.
Right. So
Which
if we're not.
which is worse, sir?
Yeah.
The tick eradication or
Well, so
population
both of
control?
them are important, right?
Yeah.
So either we feed year round or we hunt deer. Either one is gonna help.
Maybe we can reduce the number of deer first and then skip a year and feed
Feed a
Yeah,
corn.
there you go.
You know, that's what I was thinking
Okay.
is a possibility.
And the population gets to the point to where you don't need to hunt deer because the population is where it needs to be, and we'll feed all year. But if your population goes to 600, 700,
Okay.
you know, then
Yeah,
we need to get it back down, and then we'll feed. So it's a tool,
Yeah.
two tools that we can use.
Seems like step A would be to get, survey, get a
Yes.
census.
Right,
Yeah.
right, and we intend to.
In that, we need some help. We don't,
Yes.
obviously, I don't know, is it
No, they
even feasible to do it by chopper like we do on the ranch we
Yes,
run
sir.
on? or
Yes,
is it-
and that would be the best way to
Or
do
is
it.
it by pickup truck, or, you know?
Probably
You can't
helicopter
see, yeah.
would be- yeah.
Chopper would be way better, but we
Yeah.
need to know who around this area.
We
can
know some
provide
people
that
that.
service.
We can get that done.
And I think we need to do that,
Absolutely.
irregardless of what
Yeah.
else
Right,
takes
that is
place, but
correct.
we need to know where we're at right now.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
And see, the Nilgai would be the same thing, because they have singles and twins.
Right.
And, you know, if there's enough feed, they'll have twins. If there's not enough feed, the grass gets low, drought or whatever, then they might just have a single. But deer do the same thing. And deer have predators. You've got the coyotes and bobcats that come around. Nilgai, their predators are tigers. There are no predators other than us.
Man.
Right.
No tiger.
Yeah. And I'm curious, how many of you all out here would want Nilgai meat? Okay, very good. Very
There you go.
good.
Everybody got our numbers.
Three in the deep fridge.
Okay, so what do you need from us?
Is this something that y'all would like us to move forward in creating a plan?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
I think it's an action.
It would probably need to be when the weather's cool, like maybe next fall or winter, because, you know, you don't wanna go and kill a bunch of animals and then it's so hot, but by the time y'all come out and can get the animal and gut it out there, we can throw the guts in a pit, you know, and the skin or whatever. You know, we do wanna scratch those nilgai that are harvested, and deer, of course, for ticks to kinda get an idea and go from there, okay?
We can do that.
Can I run
In
down
fact,
the
I'll make a
country and shoot
motion
'em?
that we let the,
Hey, if you're good at it, maybe so.
let the, people do their plan, but I mean, in that motion, we definitely need to have a professional census survey count,
Right.
whatever you wanna name it, done, so that we know where we are first, and then you can develop a plan based
Right.
on that.
Yeah.
Right, because we have to know how many are out there.
Right.
And I live on a ranch, and I can assure you, there's always more than what you think you have. Yes, sir.
Ma'am, are y'all gonna have fence before you start shooting?
We're hoping to.
It will be done this year. Yes, sir. Right now, those
I've had a
sections,
lot of deer in Vincennes.
Motion on the table.
Uh-huh.
And an
Point of
animal
order.
that big, you shoot him and wound him, he's gonna tear that fence off
Yeah.
the
You
head.
might, yes, sir.
Everybody's gonna follow him, so your senses are.
I
Yeah.
second that
Right.
motion
Yeah.
for, Mr. Kendrick.
yeah.
Yes, sir.
So
You're
there-
And to be
right.
clear on the
There's two sections that are
motion that,
underwater.
can we have order?
Order, please.
Just to understand your motion that you move to give authorization to the group-
Research.
research,
Texas
do an
Animal
assessment,
Health
and they come up with a
Yeah.
plan?
Yeah.
Is that what I heard?
Yes.
what you
Okay,
heard.
I second that motion.
Okay, motion's been made by Commissioner Kendrick and seconded by Commissioner Trevino. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carried.